My name is Clara Thorne. I'm 32 years old, and until recently, my life felt like a room filled with carefully preserved artifacts, each one cataloged and stored behind glass. I work as a historical researcher for a small private archive in Portland, a job that suits my nature. I find solace in the quiet dust of the past, in the scent of old paper and leather-bound books. I live alone in a small apartment overlooking a courtyard filled with ferns that glisten in the perpetual Oregon drizzle. It is a life of stillness, a deliberate quiet I cultivated after the noise of a great, personal sorrow had finally faded to a persistent, low hum. The day it all changed began, as most days do, with the mundane. A text message from my mother, Catherine, Union Station. 3 p.m. Don't be late, darling. No context, no explanation. That was her way. Efficiency masquerading as affection. I arrived at 3, a small, paper-wrapped gift in my tote bag. It was a bar of lavender and cedar soap, handmade by a woman at the farmer's market. My brother, Simon, had mentioned my mother was stressed. I thought the scent might soothe her. I imagined us sitting together for a moment, a rare pocket of peace. I imagined she might look at me, really look at me, and see that the daughter who had fractured 6 months ago was slowly, carefully, piecing herself back together. But she didn't even get out of the car. Simon was the one waiting on the polished terrazzo floor of the station, looking effortlessly elegant in a cashmere sweater the color of sea fog. He smiled his easy, brilliant smile, the one that had always disarmed everyone, including me. Beside him were 2 strollers, and in them, my niece and nephew, 4-year-old Nora and 2-year-old Milo. "Claire, you're a lifesaver," he said, kissing my cheek. The air around him smelled of expensive cologne and something else, something sharp and electric, like imminent departure. He pressed the smooth, cold handles of the strollers into my hands. "We're heading off. A little celebratory trip." "Trip?" I asked, my fingers tightening on the handles. Milo was asleep, his small face flushed, a plush dinosaur clutched in his fist. Nora stared up at me with wide, curious eyes, a smudge of chocolate on her cheek. "A Scandinavian cruise," Simon said, already turning away, waving over a porter for his luggage. "Just for a couple of weeks. You know how it is. We needed a break." I saw my mother then, through the tinted window of a black town car idling at the curb. She was on her phone, a silk scarf knotted at her throat. She glanced up, saw me, and offered a brief, dismissive wave. She mouthed the words, "Thank you," her expression one of relieved impatience. Then, a text chimed on my phone. It was from her. "I'll transfer you some money for your trouble. This will be a good project for you. Keep you busy." A project. Keep me busy. As if my grief were a form of unemployment. As if my quiet life was an empty space she and Simon had the right to fill with their own burdens. Simon gave my shoulder a final, proprietary squeeze. "The diaper bag has everything. Nanny's number is on the fridge, but she's on vacation. You'll be fine. You're great with them." He wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, toward the departure board, toward his own freedom. Then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd moving toward the northbound train, leaving me standing under the grand, vaulted ceiling of the station. I was left with the weight of 2 children I barely knew, an overnight bag I'd packed for a phantom visit, and the crushing, familiar silence of being seen not as a person, but as a convenience. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The researcher in me took over, the part of my brain that observes and documents. I noted the brand of their luggage, impossibly expensive. I noted the casualness of their betrayal, as if they were asking me to water their plants. I noted the trusting, innocent faces of the children who had no idea they'd just been abandoned. They thought I would do as I was told. They thought the quiet, grieving daughter, the sister who had always smoothed things over, would simply absorb this latest imposition. For years, I had been the family archivist of feelings, the keeper of secrets, the one who absorbed the shocks so that their polished lives could continue, uninterrupted. They assumed that my sorrow had made me pliant. But they were wrong. Grief hadn't made me weak. It had hollowed me out, and, in the empty spaces, something hard and clear had begun to grow. Something like resolve. They didn't know that I had a number in my phone, a name they had methodically erased from the family narrative. Priya Mehta, Simon's ex-wife. The mother of these two beautiful children. The woman they told everyone had simply walked away. I had saved her number from an old email a year ago, the day I helped Catherine take down all the photos of Priya from the mantelpiece. Catherine had spoken of her in hushed, pitying tones. So unstable, she'd murmured, wrapping a silver-framed wedding photo in tissue paper. Postpartum is a terrible thing. She just snapped. Couldn't handle being a mother. Simon's version was more dramatic. He'd painted a picture of a woman who fled in the night, abandoning her family for a life of selfish freedom. It was a story they told so often and so convincingly that it had become the official family history. But a good researcher knows that official histories are often the first draft of a lie. Standing there, with the scent of popcorn and diesel in the air, holding the small, warm weight of Milo's hand as he stirred from his sleep, I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over her name. I had never called. I had been too lost in my own fog, too tired to fight battles that weren't mine. But they had just made this my battle. I pressed the call button. It rang once. Twice. My heart hammered against my ribs. What if she didn't answer? What if she hated me? On the third ring, a voice answered, soft and cautious. Hello, Priya, I said, my own voice unsteady. It's Clara. Clara Thorne. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. A long, humming silence. I could hear the faint sound of traffic in her background, a world away. Clara, she repeated, the name a question, a memory she was trying to place in a hostile landscape. Simon's sister? Yes, I said. I have the children. Milo and Nora. They're with me. They're safe. The silence that followed was heavier than 1,000 words. It was filled with a year of pain, of unanswered questions, of a narrative stolen. When she finally spoke, her voice was a fragile thread. What do you mean you have them? Where is Simon? He's on a trip, I said, the words tasting like ash. He and my mother left them with me. At the train station. I heard a sound like a muffled sob, quickly suppressed. They told me I wasn't allowed to see them, she whispered. They said I was a danger. Simon's lawyer sent papers. He told immigration I was mentally unfit, that I'd abandoned them. He filed for emergency custody while I was in the hospital. The story spilled out, not in a torrent of anger, but in a slow, steady stream of exhausted truth. She'd had severe postpartum depression after Milo's birth. She had voluntarily checked herself into a clinic for 2 weeks. In that time, Simon, with Catherine's full support and a signed letter from her attesting to Priya's instability, had built a legal fortress around their children, effectively locking her out. He told her if she fought it, he would make sure she was deported. She was a ghost in her own children's lives, living 3 states away, receiving only filtered updates and occasional, stilted FaceTime calls supervised by Simon. They told the world I left, she said, her voice cracking. But I was pushed. He took my children, and then he took my story. The quiet hum of my own grief resonated with the profound injustice in her voice. We were 2 different women, silenced by the same people for their own convenience. Priya, I said, a sudden clarity cutting through the haze. Do you want to see them? More than anything, she breathed. But I can't. I have no rights. You have me, I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. I'm buying you a plane ticket to Portland. It will be waiting for you at the counter. Come home. I didn't wait for her to argue. I hung up, my hand trembling, not with fear, but with a strange, unfamiliar power. I looked down at Nora, who was patiently waiting, her little hand now tucked into mine. She looked up at me and offered a shy, hopeful smile. In that moment, I wasn't Simon's fragile sister or Catherine's convenient project. I was the keeper of a truth, and I was about to return it to its rightful owner. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of quiet order, felt all wrong. It was a space for one person's solitude, not for the sprawling, joyful chaos of children. The half-finished tapestry on my loom and the neat stacks of books seemed to belong to another woman, one who existed before this moment. In my bedroom, tucked away in a cedar box, was the sonogram photo from the pregnancy I had lost. A tiny, gray ghost of a life that never was. My mother had told me that focusing on Simon's children would be healing. Now I saw the cruelty of that suggestion for what it was: not an act of kindness, but a way to redirect my love, my energy, my very being, into the service of their needs. I couldn't stay there. I needed air. I needed earth. I needed Tess. Tess was my oldest friend, a landscape designer who had fled the city years ago for a small, rambling cottage nestled in the woods near the Columbia River Gorge. Her life was governed by the seasons, not by social obligations. She answered on the second ring. "Claire? Is everything okay?" Her voice was like warm soil. "Can I come stay with you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "I have company." She didn't ask for details. She never did. The doors unlocked. "There's a pot of soup on the stove. Come." The drive out of Portland felt like an escape. The gray cityscape gave way to the towering green pines of the gorge, their scent washing through the car's vents, clean and wild. The kids were surprisingly calm in the backseat, lulled by the motion of the car and the quiet music I played. Milo babbled to his dinosaur, and Nora watched the rain-streaked trees fly by. I felt a fierce, protective ache in my chest. They were not pawns. They were not projects. They were children. Tess's cottage was a haven of lived-in warmth. A fire crackled in the wood stove, handmade ceramic mugs hung from hooks in the kitchen, and the whole place smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. She took one look at me, at the two bewildered children, and simply opened her arms. I hugged her tightly, leaning into her strength for a moment before turning back to my charges. "So," Tess said, her eyes twinkling as she knelt to Nora's level. "Who are these adventurers?" For the next few hours, I was just Aunt Clara. I heated up Tess's lentil soup, carefully blowing on each spoonful for Milo. I helped Nora build a magnificent fort out of couch cushions and old quilts, which she promptly declared was a bear cave. I read "Where the Wild Things Are" 3 times, my voice growing hoarse, until their breathing grew deep and even. Milo fell asleep tucked against my side, his small body a warm, trusting weight. Nora was curled at the other end of the sofa, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like Tess's lavender garden. Watching them sleep in the flickering firelight, a profound sense of purpose settled over me. This was not the purpose my mother had intended: an unpaid, unthanked nanny service. This was something else entirely. This was an act of quiet rebellion, of righting a terrible wrong. And it was then, in the safety of Tess's home, that I allowed myself to think about the folder on my laptop. It was password protected and innocuously labeled Thorne Family Correspondence. But inside was my own private archive, a collection I had been building for months, almost unconsciously. Being a researcher teaches you to pay attention to primary sources, to look for discrepancies in the narrative. I had started after Priya left. It began with a nagging feeling, a detail that didn't fit. Simon had claimed Priya had drained their joint savings account before she fled, but I, who had helped him set up his online banking, happened to see a statement. The large withdrawal was dated 2 days after he had filed for emergency custody. It was a loose thread. I pulled. Quietly, I had started digging. I downloaded bank statements. I saved screenshots of manipulative texts he'd sent Priya, which he'd once shown me as proof of her instability. I found the court filings online and saw the dates didn't line up with his story. I even found a copy of the travel consent form he'd used to take the children to visit our cousins in California last summer, a form supposedly signed by Priya. I remembered seeing her signature on old birthday cards. The one on the form was a clumsy forgery. I had gathered these things not with a plan, but with a growing sense of unease. I told myself it was just my archivist's instinct, a need to preserve the truth, even if it was a truth I was too afraid to confront. I was grieving, I was tired. I let myself believe their story because the alternative was too monstrous to contemplate, that my brother was cruel and my mother was his willing accomplice, and that I, by my silence, was complicit. But now they had pushed me out of my silence. They had handed me the evidence of their own negligence, two beloved, abandoned children. They had assumed I was too broken to fight back. They had forgotten that my work, my entire life, was about uncovering the stories that people tried to bury. I sat at Tess's rustic wooden table, my laptop open, the firelight dancing on the screen. The folder was open. The evidence was all there. I was no longer just a bystander. I was a witness. And I was ready to testify. Priya arrived the next morning, on the first flight from Denver. I met her just outside the security gate. She was smaller than I remembered, enveloped in a large, gray hoodie, her dark, curly hair pulled back from a face that was pale with exhaustion and fear. She carried a single, worn canvas tote bag. Her eyes darted around the airport, not looking for me, but for threats. She looked like a refugee, which, I realized, is exactly what she was. When she saw me, she froze. For a moment, I saw the terror in her eyes, the fear that this was another trick, another turn of the screw in Simon's cruel game. "They're at my friend's house," I said softly, closing the distance between us. "They're safe. They ate oatmeal for breakfast and Nora is currently trying to teach Milo how to roar like a bear." A choked sound escaped her throat. The rigid wall of her composure seemed to crack, just for a second. She nodded, unable to speak, and followed me to the car. The drive to the gorge was silent, but it was a silence thick with anticipation. I didn't push her to talk. I just drove, pointing out the waterfalls cascading down the basalt cliffs, a small, normal gesture in a profoundly abnormal situation. When we pulled up to Tessa's cottage, Priya hesitated, her hand on the car door. "I'm scared," she whispered. "What if they don't remember me?" "They remember you," I said, my voice full of a certainty I didn't know I possessed. "A mother is not a memory you can erase." I led her inside. The children were in their pillow fort, the bear cave, their backs to the door. Nora was growling playfully. Milo was giggling. "Nora? Milo?" I said gently. "Someone is here to see you." They turned. Nora's eyes went wide. She stared at Priya, her head cocked. And then, a tiny, hesitant whisper. "Mama?" It was not a statement. It was a question, asked as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to hope for the answer. That single word broke the dam. Priya didn't run or scream. She sank to her knees on the worn wooden floor, her arms outstretched. She didn't sob, but tears streamed down her face, silent and cleansing. "Oh, my babies," she breathed. Milo scrambled out of the fort and launched himself into her arms. Nora followed a moment later, more cautiously, and then she too was clinging to her mother, her small face buried in Priya's shoulder. They wrapped around her like vines finding their tree after a long, hard winter. I turned away, giving them their reunion, my own eyes stinging. This was not my moment to witness. It was a sacred space, a family remaking itself in the warm light of a cottage kitchen. Later, after the children had finally fallen asleep again, this time tangled around Priya on the sofa as if to anchor her to the spot, she and I sat at the table. Tess had discreetly busied herself in the garden, leaving us to talk. I made us chamomile tea, and we sipped it from mismatched ceramic mugs. "Why?" Priya asked, her voice raw. "Why are you doing this, Clara?" "After everything, they're your family." I looked at my hands, wrapped around the warm mug. I didn't have a grand, heroic answer. I only had the simple, unvarnished truth. Because what they did to you is wrong. And what they did to me was wrong. And for a long time, I thought those were two different things. But I see now they come from the same place. A place that believes some people's pain doesn't matter. I paused, then added, and they left the children with me. They made me responsible. They just didn't realize I would take that responsibility seriously. She nodded slowly, a deep, shuddering sigh escaping her. He has all the power, Clara. The court orders the money. He has a story, I corrected her gently. A well-told lie. But a lie is fragile. We have the truth. I turned my laptop toward her and opened the folder. I call it the Thorn Archive. One by one, I showed her everything. The forged signature. The bank statements. The saved text messages. The timeline of the court filings that proved he'd acted while she was hospitalized. I even played her a short voice memo I'd taken on my phone weeks ago when I'd stopped by his condo. He'd been boasting to a friend on speakerphone, not realizing I was listening from the kitchen. She's not a threat. Simon's voice echoed tinny and arrogant from the laptop speakers. Even if she tried to fight, who would believe her? She's got no money, no connections. I have the house, the kids, Mom's backing. I have the narrative. Priya stared at the screen, her face a mask of grief and dawning fury. The narrative, she repeated softly. He stole my life and called it a narrative. This wasn't just about getting her children back. This was about reclaiming her name, her sanity, her story. I have a friend, I said. Her name is Rachel. We went to college together. She's an immigration and family law attorney. She's sharp, and she does not like bullies. I made the call. I laid out the situation, concisely, factually, like I was presenting a research brief. The fraudulent documents, the international travel, the clear evidence of parental alienation and custodial interference. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was cold steel. Clara, this is more than a simple custody dispute. By taking the children on an international trip without the legal mother's genuine consent, especially under these circumstances, your brother has likely violated the Hague Convention on International Child Abduction. What does that mean legally? I asked. It means the State Department can get involved, Rachel said. It means we can file an emergency motion, and he may not be permitted to re-enter the country with the children until this is adjudicated. He thought he was untouchable. He's about to find out how wrong he is. While Priya read Goodnight Moon to her children for the first time in a year, her voice soft and steady, I sat at Tessa's table and began to draft the declaration. I attached the bank statements, the screenshots, the forged signature. I was no longer a passive archivist. I was building a case. Simon and Catherine had left me with the luggage. I was simply unpacking it for the world to see. The first ripple of their panic arrived on Sunday morning. A text from Simon, breezy and entitled, accompanied by a palm tree emoji. Morning, sis. Hope my little angels are behaving. Send me some pics. I didn't reply. Priya, Rachel, and I had agreed. Silence from our end. Let them wonder. Let them spin. An hour later, another text. Claire? Everything okay? Then a missed call. Then another. By afternoon, the cheerful facade had crumbled. Clara, what is going on? Mom is starting to worry. Call me back immediately. I was sitting on Tessa's porch, watching Priya push Nora on a wooden swing hanging from a thick oak branch. Milo was chasing butterflies in the tall grass. The sound of their laughter was a balm. My phone buzzed again. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was clipped, irritated. Clara, this is not funny. Simon is very upset. We trusted you. Whatever point you think you're making, you've made it. Now, call him. They still didn't get it. They thought this was a tantrum, a power play. They couldn't conceive of a world where their actions had real, lasting consequences. They had operated with impunity for so long, they had forgotten what accountability felt like. On Monday morning, Rachel filed the emergency motion. It detailed Simon's fraud, Catherine's complicity, and the potential violation of international law. She requested an immediate temporary custody order for Priya and a hearing as soon as possible. She also sent a formal notice to the State Department. The first official response came not to us, but to Simon. He tried to FaceTime me that evening. I finally answered. His face filled the screen, tanned and furious, the sleek, minimalist decor of a luxury cruise ship cabin behind him. "Where are my children?" he demanded, his voice tight with rage. "They're with their mother," I said calmly. He actually laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "Don't be ridiculous. Priya can't do anything. I have sole custody." "That custody," I said, my voice as level as a frozen lake, was obtained fraudulently. "And a copy of the forged travel consent form you used last summer is now with our lawyer. So, is the voice recording of you admitting you control the narrative? I'd suggest you find a very good attorney, Simon. And I wouldn't recommend trying to board your return flight." The color drained from his face. The easy charm vanished, replaced by the raw, ugly face of a bully who had just been punched in the mouth. You wouldn't," he stammered. "She's our sister. You left me at a train station with 2 toddlers while you sailed to Norway," I replied. "You don't get to call me sis anymore." I ended the call. The explosion came 20 minutes later. It wasn't a call from Simon, but a knock on my apartment door in Portland. I had driven back to pick up some more clothes, leaving Priya and the kids in the sanctuary of Tessa's cottage. It was Catherine. She looked like she had driven straight from her country club, still in her tailored linen suit, but her makeup was smudged and her perfect composure was shattered. She didn't wait for an invitation, just pushed past me into my quiet living room. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice trembling with a fury I had never seen directed at me. "You have ruined this family. You have humiliated us. After everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "We supported you. We gave you a purpose when you were unwell," she said, unable to even name my miscarriage, my grief. "You have always been so fragile, so sensitive. We thought giving you the children would help." And then she said the words that severed the final thread of my old life. "You've never had a child of your own. You can't possibly understand the sacrifices a mother has to make." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She was using my deepest pain as a weapon, as a justification for her own manipulative behavior. For a lifetime, a remark like that would have shattered me. I would have crumpled, apologized, and tried to fix what I had supposedly broken. But I was not that person anymore. I stood straight, my hands steady at my sides. I looked my mother in the eye. "You didn't give me the children to help me, Mother. You gave them to me because you wanted a free babysitter. You have never seen me as a daughter. You see me as an employee, an unpaid, endlessly patient assistant for the family's needs." I took a breath. "Well, I quit." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. For the first time in my life, I had left her speechless. The narrative she held about me, fragile, quiet, compliant Clara, had just been proven false, and she had no other script to read from. The court date was set for the following week. The story, thanks to a leak from a sympathetic court clerk, made a small splash in the local news. The headline was sensational: "Portland Wealth Advisor Abandons Children for Nordic Cruise. Sister and ex-wife allege fraud." My inbox became a war zone. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years sent messages dripping with condemnation. "How could you air the family's dirty laundry like this?" Aunts sent passive-aggressive condolences for my obvious emotional distress. They were closing ranks, protecting the family image, protecting Simon. But there were other messages, too. A quiet one from a former colleague of Priya's. I never believed the story they told. "I'm so glad she has you." A note from one of my mother's own charity board friends. "Catherine can be persuasive. Good for you for standing up for what's right." The truth, once released, finds its own allies. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was cold and impersonal. Simon and Catherine sat at one table with a slick, expensive-looking lawyer. Simon looked diminished, his tan faded, his cashmere sweater replaced by an ill-fitting suit. Catherine sat ramrod straight, a mask of aristocratic disdain on her face. Priya sat at the other table with Rachel. She wore a simple navy blue dress. She looked not like a victim, but like a queen about to reclaim her throne. I sat in the gallery, directly behind her, a silent pillar of support. It was, in the end, anticlimactic. Rachel presented the evidence with methodical precision. The forged signature, the bank records, the timeline that proved Simon had acted in bad faith. The state official confirmed that an international travel flag had been placed on him. When Simon's lawyer tried to paint Priya as an unstable runaway, Rachel calmly presented the sworn affidavits from her doctors and therapists, confirming she had sought voluntary treatment for postpartum depression and had been a model patient. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with tired eyes, barely looked at Simon. She read through the documents, her expression growing more severe with each page. The Dubai trip, the sheer, blatant neglect of it, seemed to be the final nail in the coffin. The ruling was swift. Priya was granted immediate, sole legal and physical custody. Simon was ordered to surrender his passports and was granted limited, supervised visitation, contingent on him completing a parenting course and a psychological evaluation. It was over. Outside the courtroom, in the echoing marble hallway, Simon and Catherine swept past without a word, their faces pale with shock and fury. They didn't look at me. It was as if I had ceased to exist. Priya turned to me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You did it, Clara," she whispered. "You saved us." I shook my head, a small, genuine smile finally reaching my face. "No," I said, and I had never been more certain of anything in my life. "We saved each other." A week later, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at my apartment. Golden Boss script announced an invitation from my mother. Family dinner. Sunday at 6 p.m. It's time to forgive and heal. Forgiveness. Healing. Words they use like tools to sand down the sharp edges of their cruelty, to make it smooth enough to handle again. I threw the invitation in the recycling bin. That Sunday, I was not at my mother's perfectly set dining table. I was at a park on the sun-dappled banks of the Willamette River. I was pushing Milo on a swing, higher and higher, his delighted squeals echoing in the clear autumn air. Priya was nearby, helping Nora fly a kite that danced and dipped in the breeze. We bought sticky, sweet cotton candy and shared a bag of fries, and we laughed. This was healing. Not a forced reconciliation over roast chicken, but the quiet, joyful construction of something new. Something chosen. Something true. My mother called one last time, late one night. Her voice was thin, stripped of its usual authority. "You're really not coming back, are you?" she asked. I thought of all the years I had spent trying to be the person they wanted me to be. The quiet one, the good one, the one who never made waves. I thought of the woman I was becoming, one who valued truth over comfort and self-respect over approval. "You always told me I was fragile, Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But it turns out I'm fireproof." I hung up the phone, not with anger, but with peace. A few weeks later, a card arrived in the mail. The envelope was addressed to Auntie Claire in wobbly, crayon letters. Inside was a drawing. 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands under a giant, smiling sun. Underneath, in Priya's handwriting, it said, "Nora drew this for you." Below that, in Nora's own crooked printing, were 2 words, "My mommy." A third figure had been added, standing beside them, with a speech bubble that just had a heart in it. She'd labeled that one Clara. I traced the crayon lines with my finger. This was the only verdict that mattered. It was not about revenge. It was about restoration. It was about finding a new narrative, not in the dusty archives of the past, but in the bright, messy, beautiful crayon drawing of a child who was finally home. And in the quiet strength of the woman who had helped bring her there.